Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Wow. Thank you so much for having me. I, in particular, would like to thank the Israel Psychiatric Rehabilitation Association for bringing me here to your wonderful country, having my first opportunity to experience the fabulous Mediterranean Sea, taking long walks on the sea in the middle of winter. I came from 18 inches of snow back where I live. Needless to say, it's been wonderful to experience the warmth and your beautiful country, and especially the wonderful, wonderful people that I've met so far, and looking forward to a couple of more days of meeting great champions for the cause of recovery. So I'm here today to talk to you about recovery. As I recall, back in 1995, I had the honor of coming here. I was a younger woman at that time, and I remember giving an address and talking to the emerging psychiatric rehabilitation community here in Israel. And it is such an honor to see how far you guys have come with your efforts to spread the good news that a diagnosis of serious mental illness is not a cause for despair, and that recovery is a possibility. And so today I want to tell you about recovery and also introduce you to some tools that will support people in the journey of recovery. During the presentation today, I'm going to show you some posters in terms of PowerPoint slides. And my understanding is that these posters that I've created will be available to you via email. And that anyone at the conference will receive a copy of posters like this one. Because I wanted to start off by saying that recovery is not rocket science, right? How do I define recovery? Well, one of the ways that I define recovery is that it means having a job and having a date and a paycheck. I guess in Israel it would be on a Thursday night, right, at the end of the week. And recovery can be that simple. It's the fact that people desire to live their lives, not their diagnosis, that people desire to get on with things even after a diagnosis of a serious mental illness. And that importantly, that recovery does not happen to a secret few superstars, that recovery does not happen as through some secret fortitude of the human heart. Rather, I think recovery happens for ordinary people like me and like you, who upon awakening, we swing our feet over the edge of the bed, we stand up, and we face the day. And on some very basic level, that's what recovery is all about, is waking up in the morning, putting our feet on the ground, facing the day. That recovery is not the privilege of a few exceptional or extraordinary people, but that recovery happens for people just like you and me. And that there's so much we can do to support people in that journey of recovery. So I'm going to begin today by telling you a little bit about my own story of recovery. As I like to say, it's the only story I have. And so I would like to share some of it because all of the work I do, all of the tools that I create, all of the innovations that I have been spending my life bringing forward stem from this foundational experience of my experience with first episode psychosis. So when I was a senior in high school, I was about 17 years old, I began to experience a first episode of psychosis. Up to that point, I had grown up in a large Irish Catholic working-class family back in Massachusetts. My favorite thing to do as a teenager was to play sports. I loved to play basketball and tennis and basically any organized team sport. And I was very good at it. And I had no interest at all in academics. That just didn't pique my interest at all. So I got a perfect C- average, just enough to stay qualified to play varsity sports. But other than that, when they would give a homework assignment, I would read the comic book version of King Arthur instead of the actual book. So if you had ever told me that I would go on to get a doctorate in clinical psychology and be standing before you in Tel Aviv today, I would say, no, that's not what I want from my life. But that's an important point because it underscores the fact that this word recovery is actually a transformational process. Recovery doesn't necessarily mean going back to who we used to be before the psychosis, before the diagnosis. Rather, for many of us, recovery is a transformational journey where we become something perhaps we had never dreamed of before, right? And in that way can be a very exciting aspect of being a human being who is developing and transforming and becoming new. But in the beginning, that break, that holiday winter break that we take in the United States, my team was getting together and we were practicing our basketball team. And I began to notice that things were changing around me. The first thing I think I noticed is I became very uncoordinated and I found it difficult to stay in sync with my other team members. I became clumsy and awkward, and my coach began to notice this trouble I was having. My experience was that I couldn't have depth perception. I couldn't really see the ball coming at me. I felt just out of sync. And so my coach said, "You seem to be having a bad day. Why not go in and rest?" And I said that would be a good idea, and I'd be back tomorrow. And I went into the locker room, and I began to notice that the world around me felt and seemed more threatening than usual, that furniture seemed sharp and edgy, and instead of just furniture being something I could ignore, it would call my attention. Why am I worried about the lines in this geometry of this furniture and these angles that seem to be pointing at me? Why is that changing? As time went on, I began to feel very anxious and began to hear distressing voices. Now, these voices that I began to hear were saying mean and cruel things about me, things that I would never want to repeat to anybody else. These voices seemed to be all-knowing, all-powerful. They seemed to grab me viscerally. You know, it's really easy to ignore a boring lecturer, for instance, or a boring teacher. We can just tune out the voice of the teacher and not listen. But these distressing voices that I'm describing were quite different. These voices seemed to have the power. They weren't terribly loud, but I couldn't ignore them. They grabbed me by the gut. They grabbed me viscerally and wouldn't let go. So even though they might whisper or moan or say certain things that weren't terribly loud, I found myself engulfed by the experience of these distressing voices. And I began to struggle to figure out how to disengage from them, but the more I tried, the worse things seemed to get. In any case, slowly but surely, things continued to deteriorate for me, and undoubtedly, my family and my friends and my neighbors began to notice that I was different, that I began to barricade myself into a room. I thought that people were not who they appeared to be. That made it very difficult to trust anybody. Needless to say, over time, the situation became worse. My brothers and sisters were frightened of me. In time, of course, my family got involved, and I found myself in a psychiatric hospital. Once in the psychiatric hospital, I was quickly diagnosed with schizophrenia. And once diagnosed with schizophrenia, everyone's attitude toward me began to change. And what I was told was this: Miss Digan, you have a disease called schizophrenia. This was what my psychiatrist said to me. You have a disease called schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is a disease from which no one gets well. And he said that, Miss Digan, you're going to have to take high-dose antipsychotic medications for the rest of your life. And when the time came from discharge from this first hospital, I was told by professionals, highly trained people that I looked up to, I was told that my job was to leave the hospital and to avoid stress and to take medicine. Avoid stress? How do you live life? You know, and avoid stress? Well, the point is you don't. Basically, at the ripe old age of 18 years old, 19 years old, I was being told to retire from life. And I tell you, I've come to call that a prognosis of doom. A prognosis of doom. Because in effect, those words, spoken by a powerful psychiatrist to me, said to me that essentially my life was over. That my job was to avoid stress, no school, no romance, no work, avoid stress. What the psychiatrist didn't know is that boredom is profoundly stressful for human beings. I didn't know that at the time, and I was planning on doing what I was told. And so I was discharged from the hospital, and I returned home to my parents' house, and I took very high-dose antipsychotic medications, and I sat in a chair in my parents' living room. Well, I had been an inpatient. I had become an outstanding cigarette smoker. Okay? So having gone from an athlete to now smoking cigarettes, and I sat in that chair smoking cigarettes. When I think about that prognosis of doom, and I think about the fact that the care team, the treatment team I was working with, basically, they made a major error at that time. Because essentially what they did was that they paired the diagnosis of schizophrenia and treatment with medication, they paired that with the message, and by the way, you can never be well. And that created a profound sense of hopelessness, that my future, that my dreams, that my aspiration of becoming a coach for women's athletic teams was simply over. And that at the ripe old age of 19, 18, my job was simply to somehow exist. I've created this poster to correct that error, in a sense. I am a person, not an illness. And that, to me, is the most profound statement. It's the statement upon which all recovery efforts are based. Even to this day, unfortunately, professionals often are trained to treat diseases. But I am not a schizophrenic, and I have never been a schizophrenic. I am a person, not an illness. And the minute we turn our attention to the disease and take it away from the person, there's no one left to do the work of recovery. I am a person, not an illness. I am a person who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, for sure. But I am a person. All recovery efforts, all recovery tools and technology stem from that simple insight that the people we are working with are human beings. And because we're human beings, we are goal-directed, we are adapting, we are trying to cope with and to manage what it is that's going on in our lives. And the task of all recovery-oriented services is not so much to treat diseases as to form a collaboration with the person in addressing life challenges and opportunities. That's the foundation of it all. I am a person, not an illness. We work with, offer rehabilitation services to, and treatment to human beings. And that's good news. In any case, my treatment team at the time did not know that. And so I slipped into what I call the Coke and Smoke syndrome. What I mean by Coke and Smoke was that I was never a coffee drinker, but I did like high-test Coca-Cola and cigarettes. And so I sat in a chair in my family's living room, drinking high-test Coca-Cola and smoking cigarettes. And there was something calming about all that cigarette smoke because it meant time was passing with each passing cigarette, and that at least gave me some relief. But that my day was filled with nothing but waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning, sitting in a chair, smoking cigarettes, having some breakfast, sitting. I didn't need the TV on. I didn't need the radio on. I just sat in despair. There was nothing to do. I was told to avoid stress. Why get up and exercise? Why get up and see a friend? Right? There was nothing. I was heavily medicated. I was in despair. And so lunch would come, and after lunch I would go to bed, and I would sleep until 3 in the afternoon, and then I would get up and sit, and I would have dinner and go to bed at 8 o'clock, and that is all that I did. Now, I'll tell you that at this time of my life, the despair of that state of the Coke and Smoke syndrome, that state of hopelessness, of having no future, no sense of a pathway into the life that I wanted for myself, this despair was worse than any psychosis. And I think the part that's important for me to remember is that this despair was created by the treatment team, the care team. And it seems to me that what I had been experiencing is what I would call toxic help. Toxic help is help that hurts. And I believe that help should not hurt. Help should support our healing. Help should support the power of our humanity to adapt and our resilience to self-right ourselves after a psychotic experience. That's why I made this poster. My dreams are the stars that guide my journey of recovery. I will trust my dreams to lead me. In other words, we can't organize our recovery around a vacuum. We can't organize our recovery around nothingness. That when I was sitting all day doing nothing except avoiding stress, there was nothing around which to organize my day, to organize my recovery. There was no reason to swing my feet over the side of the bed, get up in the morning, and face the day. It simply was a void. And sometimes I worry that we have this idea that first we are going to treat the illness, and then by stabilizing you, and then we are going to maintain you, right? By having you avoid stress. So treatment and stabilization and maintenance. But the problem with the stabilization and maintenance model, right? The problem is that there is no reason to get out of bed in the morning. What the recovery model does is disrupt the maintenance and maintenance model and substitute the idea that my goals, that my dreams, that what matters to me is the very thing around which I can organize my recovery. So that finding out what is a person's hopes and dreams, what matters to you, is the first step in clinical care, in rehabilitation care. What matters to you? So what the recovery model asks us to do, that the maintenance and stabilization model fails us at, is the recovery model asks us to take the focus off of what's the matter with you, Pat Digan, and put the focus on what matters to you, Pat Digan. From what's the matter with you to what matters to you. And when we understand what matters to Pat Digan, when we understand what matters to you, then treatment, rehabilitation, peer support, medication all act in the service of supporting Pat Digan getting to what matters to Pat. In other words, until we know that key piece of information, what matters to you, and then how can treatment and rehabilitation help you get there? That's the key. That's the ticket. Okay? We see this over and over again with young people experiencing first episode psychosis in my work with On Track New York. Young people experiencing first episode psychosis can be very difficult to engage in treatment. But when we say to young people experiencing first episode psychosis, very vulnerable people, and we say to them, what do you want to do? Return to work? Go to school? Reunite with a girlfriend? What do you want to do? How can we help you get where you want to be? Young people light up. And then we introduce care, treatment, rehabilitation. These are the methods you can use to help you achieve where you want to be. I didn't know this in the beginning. I didn't know this at all. Instead, I sat in that chair day after day after day. And this extraordinary person is my grandmother. And every single day, my little Irish grandmother with a 4th grade education would come into the living room where I sat smoking cigarettes. And she would say in exactly this tone of voice, Patricia, would you like to go food shopping? And I would say no. And she would leave. Very wise woman. She left. She didn't nag me. She didn't keep, come on, go food shopping. Because if she had nagged me, I would have shut right down and gone solid like a rock. Right? But she didn't. Once a day, but every day. Even on Sundays when the supermarket wasn't open. I should have caught on, but I missed that one. Okay, very wise woman. What was she doing? What was she doing? Every day coming in. One day, for reasons that I can't account for, I said, yes, I'll go food shopping. And I added that I wouldn't put a damn thing in the cart. Not one thing. I was stubborn that way, right? But I would go and push the cart. And I tell you, pushing a grocery cart down the aisle of a supermarket was the first active step I ever took in my recovery. That's where it began, right? And why did this work, right? After months and months and months of being in the coke and smoke syndrome, in despair, nothing was reaching me, my grandmother did. Why? Well, I think in part because I loved her, and I knew she loved me, and that was important. But it was difficult to feel anything on high-dose antipsychotics. I think more so, it was the idea that my grandmother would come in once a day, every day, and she would disrupt my smoke-filled oblivion. She literally would open the door, and she would say, "Would you like to go food shopping?" And every day, she would remind me that there was a world out there. There was a world out there that was a good world. That there was a world beyond my smoke-filled oblivion. That there was a world out there that could be for me. But she was also saying to me, "Patricia, I can't carry you through the door. I can't carry you over the threshold. You have to choose to go." So she was inviting me every day, disrupting my smoke-filled oblivion and saying, "Come, there's a world for you. It's a good world. It can be for you again, but you must come." And so we did. And I went food shopping and I pushed that cart. And she was already on step 2 because I can remember her behind me saying, "Swing your arms," right? And that's okay. She wanted to go for the next step. That's my grandmother. And so that was critically important, that I have something to do. As simple as pushing a grocery cart. And I tell you, at that time of my life, it felt like climbing Mount Everest to do that, to push that grocery cart. And it's a very humbling thing to look back on that moment and to say, why that day did I say yes and not 2 years later? And the answer is, I don't know. For me, there's an important lesson in that, which is that there is always a mystery at the heart of recovery, something that science will never quite capture. You see, if you had walked by me in that living room at that time in my life, you would have seen me sitting in a chair, yellow nicotine-stained fingers and lips, and I looked like the classic stereotype of a chronic schizophrenic. You would have said, that דיגן woman is a hopeless case. By then I had had 3 hospitalizations. 3 hospitalizations, okay? Now, I think the lesson I take from that is to never judge anyone as a hopeless case. To never, well, just to always recognize that there's a person in there, even when they're hard to see, even when they seem very difficult or are faced with many challenges, there's a person percolating in there, and we can reach that person. My grandmother reached me. I've developed a poster that kind of captures this, and that is that I'll live my life, not my diagnosis. Right? I'll live my life. And this moment of pushing that cart was a powerful turning point for me. Eventually, I stumbled into a miracle. The Sony Walkman, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I know, some of you have no clue what that thing is. Right? This is a cold steel beauty. I got this as a gift, and I tell you, it was an analog cassette that you could cue up with your favorite tunes. And not only that, it had a built-in AM, FM radio, and the coolest headset you have ever seen, I'll tell you. And I got this as a gift. And As I mentioned, my distressing voices, even on high doses of medication, were still pretty bad. They were pretty distressing, right? And I got this, and I put on some favorite tunes, and I was listening to the Walkman. And suddenly, the voices weren't as powerful. I found that I could, if I really tried, listen to the lyrics, listen to the rhythm, tap my foot, even when the voices were happening. That the voices didn't have as much power to hold my attention when I listened to the Sony Walkman. It was as if the ground moved under my feet. I couldn't believe it. Are you hearing what I'm saying? What I'm saying is there was something I could do that interrupted, that transformed my experience of these distressing voices. That was extraordinary for me. I had no idea that there was something I could do that would make a difference in my experience of psychosis. Now, that's an extraordinary thing in and of itself. That up to this point, now at this point, having been years in the system, no one had ever mentioned to me that it was possible to do something that would change my experience of these symptoms. So I always take a lesson from that, and I say when I'm consulting with organizations, at what point in your care pathway when someone is coming into services do we make a very explicit point of letting them know there are things you can do to help yourself? What do you already know how to do to help yourself? Well, I was just astonished that this was possible. And I began to experiment with other ideas, like could the voices be less intense if I listened to a basketball game on the radio on the Walkman? Would that work too? And with a little practice, I found there were ways that could help too. Suddenly, I discovered my agency. That person within me began to come forward. And it emboldened me to talk to my psychiatrist about starting to lower the psychiatric medications, because I decided that I wanted to try to go to school. I had had an experience after my third hospitalization where my psychiatrist was once again telling me that I had a serious disease and I needed to gain insight into that, and that the stress of school, etc., would not be good for me. And I remember as he was saying this to me, something rose up inside of me, and I just said, "You're really wrong about me." Looking back on it, I think I was realizing that it's not so much that I lacked insight into the fact that I was unwell. I think he lacked insight into the fact that I was resilient. I wanted a life. I wanted a life. And I remember leaving his office, and something just inside of me happened. I call it a turning point. And thought came to me, and the thought was, I'm going to become Dr. Digan, and I'm going to change the mental health system so no one ever gets hurt in it again. Where did that come from? Where did that thought, how did that arrive? But it did. That thought. I've come to call it my vocation, the way that I've been called in this life of mine to serve. Now, I think I was 18 or 19 at the time, and you know, when we're young that way, we get to think a big thought like, I'll personally change the entire mental health system all by myself. That was the big plan. And of course, that's not how it happens. But I didn't know it. But it was a good start, this turning point. And so I realized, okay, I need to go to school. So I started with one course at the local community college. The course was titled English Composition 1. And I was hospitalized in the middle of that semester, but by gosh, it took me until the end of the summer, but I finished, and I got a passing grade. But the minute that I decided to go to school, to organize my recovery around that. Boy, I really had to learn a lot of new self-care skills. I had to learn a lot of new skills. How can I get through a class without freaking out? 5 minutes, 5 more minutes. I wasn't listening to the lecture, but the Walkman came in handy because I was able to tape the professor's lecture and bring it home and listen at a time when I was feeling a bit better. And so my psychiatrist and I began to work on lowering the medication, and it seemed like the more that we lowered the medication, then I would start getting very anxious or symptoms would start to return. But then I was able to develop some more skills with my Walkman and in other ways to make it through class. And I think what I learned through this process, and this poster says it, I am not the problem. I am part of the solution. And in my work with my care team, with my psychiatric care team, it took us years to realize. I was realizing it, and my psychiatrist, my therapist, etc., were realizing it, that really, I'm a human being, and because I'm a human being, I'm adaptive, I am trying to figure this thing out, and that slowly but surely, I was developing skills in how to help myself. And so that was incredibly important, and I think, again, we overlook this when we see somebody who's very unwell, who's really struggling, who's experiencing multiple, perhaps even complex challenges. It's easy to forget that that very same individual at that very same moment has adaptive skills. We forget to ask people, what do you already know how to do that helps with this? So even if in an emergency room, for instance, we might ask a person, what do you know that helps with these voices? What do you know how to do that helps with these terrifying fears? What do you know how to do that helps you get to sleep a little bit or make sleep easier? Instead, we're focusing on the illness, on the symptoms, on the illness, on the symptoms, okay? So, eventually, of course, I did go on and get a doctorate in clinical psychology. And of course, there are many more stories about what it took to get there. And it's not like the hospitalizations ended or that medication ended or any of that, right? I was scared, I was vulnerable, but I had a reason to get up in the morning. I had a purpose, I had a dream, I had a calling to become Dr. Digan and change the mental health system so no one ever got hurt in it again. That was what I was called to do. That was my reason to get out of bed in the morning. That was my reason to stand up and to face the day. And even when I was filled with terrible fears or suffering with really tough symptoms, I still would get up and move because I had to, because I wanted to, because I was on my way, because I knew now what mattered to me. And what mattered to me was fulfilling my dream of changing the mental health system so no one ever got hurt in it again. And importantly, I think I kept that dream a secret. It's not like I announced it to the world. In those days, I was extremely vulnerable. And I think if somebody, even if they loved me and were well-intentioned, they might have said to me, "That's too big a dream, Miss Digan. Please give me a short-term goal." I think it would have crushed me. I think it would have broken me. There was not much to me at the time, not much left in me. To have anybody judge my dream, my hope as unrealistic or grandiose or too long-term, as some people sometimes say, you know, I'm not sure I would have come back from that kind of a breaking. So I kept my dream a secret. And I made my way. I confided in a few friends. But eventually, I did complete a doctorate in clinical psychology. And one of the things that I did early on, once I completed my doctorate, was to work with a guy out at the University of Kansas who said, "What would you like to study, Pat?" And I said, "What I'd like to study is I'd like to know how people use psychiatric medicine in their recovery." My sense at the time was there was a lot of talk about transforming mental health systems to a recovery orientation. But I felt strongly that we were never going to successfully transform mental health services and rehabilitation services to a recovery orientation unless we also helped to transform psychiatric services. Because my experience was that psychiatric medications could actually block the possibility of recovery when they were out of balance, when the drugs were so heavy, when the antipsychotic effects were so paralyzing that I couldn't function as a human being. That was a treatment failure in my experience, right? What was odd for me is that the treatment team seemed really pleased when I was kind of in a very heavily drugged state. And by measures that still matter today, my reduced recidivism, I wasn't returning to the hospital, I had increased community tenure. Treatment success? No, I had no life. Just because we're able to use psychiatric medications at high doses that simply reduce symptoms, so we can measure with a positive and negative symptom assessment scale, the PANS, and we see positive and negative symptoms going down. But at what price? At the price of functioning? At the price of having a life? That's an unacceptable trade-off, right? And so I wanted to know, I felt very strongly, if we're going to transform mental health services, we're going to have to transform the way people think about and use psychiatric medications. So I started by going out, like I always do, and asking everyday, ordinary people living their lives in recovery after a diagnosis of major mental illness, I asked them, "Tell me about how you use psychiatric medicine." This paper was eventually published in the Journal of Public Mental Health, Scandinavian Journal of Public Mental Health. It was called The Power of Personal Medicine. And it all started as I began to go out around the great state of Kansas, interviewing 30 people. And the strangest thing was happening. I would ask people, "Tell me how you use psychiatric medicine in your recovery." And for about 6 or 7 minutes, they'd tell me about the medication that they were taking and their relationship with their psychiatrist. And then all of a sudden, they started talking about 101 other things that they were doing in their lives to support their recovery. And I'm saying to myself, gee, it's one thing for one research participant to say that, but then the next one and the next one. They talk to me about, I ask them about medication, and they start telling me about all this other stuff. Why can't they just talk about meds? And then I met Joe in his kitchen outside of Wichita, Kansas. And Joe was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And Joe said to me, "Pat, I think there's a lot of other things that's medication that's maybe not considered medication. There's things that you can do that does change what your body does, and it may not be medicine. I still think one of the best mood stabilizers there is in life, maybe not for everyone, but for me, is math." My mouth dropped. Say, what? Math? Really? That'd drive me crazy. Wow, math. Joe gave me a great gift that day and transformed how I understand medicine. Joe told me that, in effect, math was a mood stabilizer. Joe was using psychiatric medication in his recovery, but he had stumbled into other strategies. In particular, when he would begin to feel hypomanic and teetering on the verge of moving into a full-blown mania, he would sit down at his kitchen table at his farm and take out complex mathematical equations and solve them. And that somehow he recognized that solving complex mathematical equations was as important to getting well and staying well as any mood stabilizer that he may have taken. Right? So yes, he used his mood stabilizing pill medicine, but something else was also operative for him. He employed these strategies, right? He employed mathematics as a mood stabilizer. So how did doing complex math problems help Joe? As we talked about it, he explained to me that it's really scary, Patty said, when you feel like mania is coming on. And he said, so my psychiatrist and I had worked out that I could take an extra dose of sleeping pills, sleeping medication, because sleeping medications really help me sleep when the hypomania is occurring. And sleep is critical, he said. He said, but I do the math equations and it reminds me, Joe, I've got a good mind. I can think. I'm in charge. I'm strong. I can focus. I don't have to get swept away on the mania. That's the essential active ingredient in math for Joe. That's why math is a mood stabilizer for Joe. Math is probably not a mood stabilizer for some of you. It's not for me, okay? But Joe really helped me understand that within Joe, there was a healer. I asked Joe, I said, did anybody tell you to use math as a mood stabilizer? And he said, no. He said, no one's ever asked me about what I do. I said, okay. And I asked him, did you tell your psychiatrist? Did you tell your therapist? Did you tell your case manager about using math as a mood stabilizer? He said, no. No one's ever asked me. That's important. Why is personal medicine, these things that we can do to help ourselves, that arise from within us, that we don't read in a book or find on Dr. Google, right? That we just discover within ourselves, it reminds us that people are resilient, and that Joe was able to draw on this inner healer within in order to be making his recovery. And then I realized why all the other research participants were telling me all these other things that they were doing. That in the lived experience of recovery, we don't necessarily think of it being pill medicine over here and personal medicine over here. Math is personal medicine for Joe, right? But the two work together. The Sony Walkman, I realized, was personal medicine for me. I used it. And yes, I used pill medicine, but that wasn't the whole story. That there was a healer within Joe. And Joe reminds us that we are resilient, even no matter what your diagnosis. We don't just lay around passively suffering from mental illness. I've never approved of or liked the term the suffering mentally ill. We don't sit around and suffer. We're actively trying to adapt and do something about it. And it's precisely that within us that is actively trying to adapt, actively trying to do something, that as clinicians and rehab professionals and as peer supporters, that's the person we want to connect with. That's our recovery partner. Okay? That's the person we need to find. So Joe reminds us that all people are resilient and that we have a natural self-righting capacity, right? And that we develop many adaptive strategies in order to manage some of the distress associated with a diagnosis. And that our job and that services need to focus on finding that recovery partner. Lots of things can change our biochemistry. Love can change our biochemistry. The joy that we experience when we see our kids can change our biochemistry. Laughter and intimacy can change our biochemistry. Friendship and hope, exercise can all change our biochemistry. And so for me, this is a fundamental insight into the proper use of psychiatric medications and what I have come to call personal medicines. Personal medicines I define in two ways. Personal medicines are the things that we do that put a smile on our face and that bring joy and meaning to our lives. So for Simon, right, personal medicines include walking his dog. When Simon is struggling, he tends to isolate himself in his apartment, and that can bring on a serious depression for him. Walking his dog in the neighborhood is powerful personal medicine for Simon, because when he's walking the dog in the neighborhood, he's not only getting exercise, which is an antidepressant, but he's also connecting with his neighbors and breaking through isolation, right? That's powerful personal medicine. And that Simon thinks it's just what he does. No one's ever raised that up for Simon and said, do you know, it seems that walking that dog is powerful medicine. Did you know that you had that wisdom within you to know this is good for me? This helps, right? Personal medicines can also be the smaller things that we do that help us get well and stay well. So this is Sharon, and Sharon struggles with a feeling of being, of self-loathing. She went through serious trauma throughout her childhood. And when things are getting hard for her with her traumatic stress disorder, she believes that she's dirty and that anything that touches her may die, that nothing good can come from her, right? And Sharon discovered that her personal medicine, or one of her personal medicines, was gardening. And not gardening with plants as much as gardening and growing food. And she said when she is feeling particularly bad, she will go out and get her hands down into the dirt. And she will realize that as she is tendering and nurturing these young shoots that will become fruit and vegetables, that something good is coming from her. She's nurturing life, new life. And that's powerfully healing for Sharon, right? And so that gardening becomes how, one of the ways in which she is able to intervene and stop the self-harm and realize her own goodness. Powerful personal medicine, but too often, mental health professionals working with her fail to understand this. Don't even ask about this, right? And the thing I think that's really important about personal medicine is that it's key that our personal medicine be in balance with any psychiatric medication we may use in our recovery. If psychiatric medications are causing or making it impossible for me to engage in my personal medicine, then psychiatric meds are working against my recovery. Recovery-oriented mental health care, rehab care, seeks to balance the pill medicine I may be using with my personal medicine, because both are foundational for my recovery. Both are needed, right? That when pill medicine is interfering and making Sharon so somnolent, so sleepy, that she's unable to get up and go gardening, right? Then pill medicine, the psychiatric medicine, is working against her recovery. That gardening is not just an activity of daily living for Sharon. It is as important as any psychiatric medicine she might be taking. Finding the right balance between the things we do and the medicine we may take, finding the right balance, is the pathway into recovery for many of us. That's the right use of psychiatric pill medicine, the balance. And so when we see a person who is sitting in an over-medicated state, who's in a state of complex psychopharmacology to the point where they appear to be in a chemical stupor, okay, when they are unable to engage in the things that matter in their lives, when they're on a medication which is causing tremors in the hand, and for that person, working on automobile engines is the reason they get up in the morning. It's the thing that fills their life with some purpose and some meaning and some joy, but they can't because the hands are shaking. That's pill medicine working against personal medicine. In those kinds of instances, it's critical that we help people advocate for their personal medicine getting into balance with their psychiatric medications. Let's take a minute and hear Isaac tell us about his experience with personal medicine.
Well, again, my name is Isaac. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my personal medicine and the way I've learned to deal with a lot of things in my life and the way I've helped myself deal with a lot of things in life. First of all, I have a family. I have a wife and daughter, which is really a wonderful part of my personal medicine. Whenever I look at my daughter, I feel so grateful to be alive, and the wonder of having a child and guiding that child is a wonderful experience. I'm also very interested in art, and I've been painting for over 20 years, and that's really been a catalyst in my recovery. I remember there was a time in my life when I was on pill medication. I stopped painting for 2 years, and it was one of the worst times of my life when I didn't have the way to exert my energy and my emotions, which I do on canvas. It's like taking away a breath of your life. It's like stopping to breathe. And that's how personal medicine has worked for me in a way, because when I'm not using it, when I'm not using things like walking in nature, when I'm not using things like doing my art or doing photography and music, all the personal medicine tools that I use to help me in my recovery, it's like I'm not breathing. It's like something is missing from my life. And all I can tell you is, medication and therapy may be, something that's helpful, but it's not enough. You need to take things into your own hands, rediscover your life. I'm sure there are things that you've done in the past that were interesting to you, whether it be walking in the woods, fishing on a lake, swimming, playing with a pet. I mean, pets are wonderful. I have friends who have pets, and we're actually getting a pet for my daughter very soon. So I'm looking forward to that, adding that to my personal medicine arsenal. Everyone has to have like sort of arsenal of their personal medicine, because just going and taking medication and a therapeutic community may be fine, but it doesn't reach inside you. It doesn't let you emotionally deal with a lot of things. My art, for example, has been really something. I'm able to let any way I'm feeling, whether it be anger, whether it be emotional turmoil, I'm able to release that on canvas. I find it a wonderful release. If you don't need expensive things, you can buy crayons, pastels, paper. Just sit down, let yourself go. Don't worry about how it looks. That's the most important thing. And don't worry what you use as personal medicine. No one's personal medicine is better than someone else's. Whether it be a walk in the woods, whether it be fishing on a lake, whether it be sitting in the sunshine, whatever works for you is the important thing. Art works for me, but it may not work for everyone. And I hope you will really take this advice to heed, because it's helped me dramatically in my life. I've really come to a place in my life where I'm able to cope both emotionally and physically with the stimulus around me. Due to my diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, sometimes the stimulus can be overwhelming. But when you have something that you're able to delve into, including meditation, just deep breathing, anything that helps you personally, that's a wonderful thing. And I advise you to use whatever you can find, and if you need to discuss it further, find a peer support group where people are able to help you, deal with your issues and to focus on what your personal medicine could be. And try a number of things. It'll be helpful to you. Thank you so much.
Isaac is an amazing person. He runs a large mental health service that's completely run by peer supporters in New York City, a really large agency, and he is a wonderful champion of recovery, having lived his own journey after some really difficult years. So I'm glad you got to meet Isaac today. Now, personal medicine is a very foundational idea. Again, it's not rocket science. When we look at people's personal medicine, and we looked at over 2,500 examples of individuals using personal medicine, and we analyzed their personal medicine using a qualitative study, we found that personal medicine seemed to fall into various categories, none of which are really surprising, but family, friends, hobbies and games, relaxation, religion and faith. But what I love are the examples, the specifics, because ultimately personal medicines are not simply coping strategies. Categories are generic coping strategies, but personal medicine is most fundamentally personal, right? So cooking for my mom helps me feel needed is powerful personal medicine. Reading my Bible calms me down. This won't be everybody's personal medicine, but for one individual, that's powerful medicine. Fishing on Sunday helps me forget my troubles. Playing hoops with my friends channels my anger. And petting my cat helps my anxiety, okay? And importantly, personal medicines are what we do, it's not what we take. And so if a person says smoking cigarettes is my personal medicine, no, that's nicotine and you're taking the nicotine, right? So that would not be personal medicine. Personal medicines are what we do, right? And when we look at research findings related to people who have been introduced to the power of personal medicine in their own recovery, we find that use of personal medicine increases over time. Use of personal medicine actually measurably increases activation in self-care. And that activation in self-care, of course, is associated with improved health outcomes. So there are some really good reasons to support people in discovering and using their personal medicine, as well as increasing the personal medicine that's available to them. But also, I like the concept of personal medicine because it is a very disruptive innovation. So, as I told you, we're about trying to transform mental health services. But sometimes in order to transform them, we also need to disrupt and then transform it. So in the system as it currently exists, at least in the United States, there's just this widespread given that medicine must be and only is a pill. Personal medicine disrupts that mentality by saying medicine can also be what I do. And this is important because it raises up what I do to the status of a medication. And by the way, personal medicine is not quote-unquote anti-psychiatry, and I am not an advocate of simply saying to people, hey, go off your psychiatric medications and simply use personal medicine. That is not my opinion at all. I have found psychiatric medicines to be truly beneficial at certain times in my recovery, for sure, right? Psychiatric medications can be a powerful tool that we can use in our recovery, but we also need the power of personal medicine in our lives. And finding the synergy between the two, the right balance between the pill medicine and what we do, is the pathway into recovery for many of us. I like the idea of personal medicine because it gets the focus off of what's the matter with you and gets it on what matters to you. For Simon, walking that big pup is powerful personal medicine, and that's part of what matters to him in his life. If he were to be on medication that makes him so drugged up that he can't go out and walk his dog, the medicine is working against his recovery. Personal medicine disrupts the notion that health care is something that simply gets delivered to me, the patient, right? Health care is co-created. Health care is co-created. Health is not a thing over here that we deliver to sick people over here. It's only by connecting with the people we're working with and discovering that person not as an illness, right, but as a force for healing in their own lives, that's where the co-creation of health occurs. It's a very disruptive notion. Personal medicine disrupts and then transforms the idea that you are sick, and instead reinforces, no, you're resilient. You may have a diagnosis, but you can live your life and not your diagnosis. And you can live your life and not your diagnosis because you're a person and not an illness. Because you're not the problem, you're part of the solution, right? Personal medicine disrupts that monotonous mantra we hear, which is take your meds, take your meds. You seem a little off today. Did you take your meds? We hear it all the time, right? As if it's the only thing that really matters. Take your meds. And instead it says, find the balance between your pill medicine and your personal medicine. And that's, I think, a much more recovery-oriented message. So on that note, in my small company, we have been developing this idea of personal medicine. In my second lecture, I'll tell you a lot more about how we do this. But in addition to helping people discover their own personal medicine, and by the way, it is such a joy to help people discover their personal medicine, because you see a person come in and they're kind of like, oh, I'm just kind of a mental patient, you know, and you start talking to them about personal medicine, the things that matter in their life. What do you do? Tell me about what matters to you. And all of a sudden, you'll see, I remember this particular woman, Jew, and she says, she said, I am a schizophrenic, you know, I'm very sick, very sick. She's been in the system for many, many years. I said, yeah, okay, yeah. I said, but what do you do? Like, what do you do? What do you like to do? And she kind of looked at me sheepishly. Strange I would ask her this. And she says, well, she says, I see my grandson, and I help take care of him. I said, you do? I said, how old is he? And all of a sudden, she's starting to change. She's transforming in front of my very eyes, you know? She's gone from sort of looking kind of like a mental patient to grandma. And she's magnificent. And I said, well, how does it help? How does taking care of the little one help? Oh, she's now radiating. She's like levitating practically. She's so different at this moment. And she says, well, she says, it means that I can help my daughter, my family, go to their job and I can watch the little one. I said, how did you know how to do that? How did you know? She said, I just knew. You just knew? And she looked at me and she said, yeah, she said, I thought I was crazy. I thought that was all. But actually, you know, and she said, I never knew something good could come from me, she actually said to me. Wow, I never knew something good. That's the healing power of personal medicine. Personal medicines are not simply generic coping strategies. It's things that have come from within us and that redefine us as resilient people, not sick people, right? The power of personal medicine to disrupt Ju's understanding of herself as a chronic schizophrenic. No, I'm a grandma. I'm a person, not an illness. That's the power of personal medicine. And then we've discovered ways we can help people cultivate their personal medicine. So I want to share some examples, because we have a whole suite of what we call personal medicine cards. And personal medicine cards help people cultivate lots of new personal medicines for use in their lives, right? So this is Stephen. And Stephen grew up in a rural farming community. And he went to school, to university, in a big city. And he had never been in a big city before. And when he got to classes, he started getting flooded with a lot of fear and negative thinking, right? He began to think, oh, these city slickers, they all have better educations than me. I'm just a dumb farm kid. I'm never going to keep up here at college. All the smart people, I just can't. And he was flooded by negative thinking to the point where depression set in, and he just was really having a miserable time. And so he sought out a college counselor who uses our personal medicine guides, we call them. And the counselor had access to all of these personal medicine cards, about 20 of them, having to do with personal medicine for negative thinking. And the counselor at college helped Stephen review the 20 cards, or personal medicine cards for negative thinking. And here's what the front of the card said. Now, these are small pieces of paper that you can fold over, right? And the card on this side says, I will shrink my inner critic down to size. And then on the back side of the card, it says, you can't do math, you're a loser. Most of us have an inner critic that fuels our negative thinking. Imagining our inner critic as something small or silly can help. And then the card prompts me to personalize this strategy, right? My inner critic looks like. And Stephen ended up drawing what he called Mr. Cranky Pants, right? And so what he said, he put that on the back of his card. So he's got this card in his pocket now. And every time that the negative thinking starts kind of attacking him again, he takes out his card and he looks at the back of his card and he thinks of that inner critic as this little stick man called Mr. Cranky Pants. And what he says about that is, when I think of my inner critic as Mr. Cranky Pants, it makes me laugh. I have more power over my thought when I imagine it as this funny little character. Yes, I still have my bad days, but being able to imagine my negative thoughts as a Mr. Cranky Pants helps me feel like I can manage them and dismiss them. And so this personal medicine card really seemed to help Stephen. Here's Sue. Sue had very harsh and very distressing voices that put her down. And she tried getting angry at them, but it seemed the more angry she got at her distressing voices, the more powerful they became. Getting angry and dismissing her voices was not a strategy at all that was working for her, right? And so she and her peer specialist looked at the suite of personal medicine cards for distressing voices. And she chose the card to start with, I will develop compassion for my voices. And then on the back side of the card, she said, it can be helpful to think of our voices as an early warning system trying to protect us from harm. Seen from this perspective, voices may be trying to help us. Using our compassionate self, we can thank the voices for the warning and tell them we'll stay safe and stay out of harm's way. And then the card prompts her with 2 columns, my voices warn me and my compassionate response. So she worked through this card with her peer specialist, right? We're a peer supporter. And she said, okay, there are those voices that say, you're radioactive, right? And so when they come on, she'll say out loud to herself, she'll say, I'm on it, you can rest now. I'm on it, you can rest. That's the compassionate response. And developing a repertoire of these compassionate responses, keep your eyes down. I'll definitely be careful. They're laughing at you. Thanks, I'll put earbuds in. You suck. I'll keep my pride in check. Okay, and she said that it took her quite a while to be able to remember these compassionate responses. So she'd keep taking her card out to remind herself. But that over time, it gave her a newfound sense of control in the face of what sometimes can be overwhelming voices. Another example, this is Paco. And like many people using antipsychotic medications, Paco found the medications helpful, but also began to develop diabetes and a lot of weight gain as an unwanted effect of the medications. And so Paco became interested in strategies for managing food cravings, right? He was also trying other things like glucophage and medications to help control the onset of the diabetes. But he was also trying to curb and manage powerful food cravings, right? And so he started by choosing a card that says, I will avoid food porn. And then he said, mouth-watering pizza ads on TV at night, pictures of food on social media, baking shows, fast food billboards. All of these are types of food porn that can trigger food cravings. And avoiding food porn is a great way to get control over cravings, right? And so then he has to personalize this card and make it his own. And so he says, I watch all the baking shows, and I swear my mouth starts watering after 2 minutes. The cravings get really bad. I think a lot of us can relate to this, right? And then he said, my plan to avoid food porn would be, I've been wanting to watch that new crime show. I'll watch it at night instead of my baking shows. And then he tries this card for a while, and he says, yes, I'll use it again. It's helpful. But as time went on, he needed even more personal medicine to kick in to help with these powerful drug-induced cravings. So another card that he decided to try was, I will talk back to my food cravings. Researchers have found that if we say, I can't eat that, it actually makes food cravings worse. If we say, I don't eat that, we can gain power to dismiss the craving. And so he fills it in. And he says, okay, my strategy will be when someone offers me sugary food, I will say, I'm allergic to that. Not I can't have that candy, I'm allergic to the sugar. And this was a powerful card for him. And what he said was that, wow, now I'm doing good. When I use my diabetes meds along with my personal medicine, it's really powerful. My blood sugars are going down. And I want to live a long and healthy life. Now I feel like I have a chance at that. And he felt really motivated by his success. And he added even more personal medicine cards to keep him on track. So we have personal medicine cards for false beliefs. And we have personal medicine cards for self-harm and a lot of other categories. I think importantly, we also, through personal medicine cards, help people look at the role that oppression may have on their experiences of distress, as well as turn to cultural understandings to help develop strategies for managing distress. So personal medicine is a disruptive concept, I think, and it's one that I think is hugely beneficial in beginning to connect the work we're doing in rehabilitation, the work we're doing in peer support, and the work that's happening in clinical services. My personal medicine. There I am in Israel in 1995 when I had a long blonde braid. For me, personal medicine includes what I'm here doing today. Way back as a young person, I had a calling to carry a message of hope for recovery and to work towards trying to transform the mental health system so no one ever gets hurt in it again. It's one of the reasons that I swing my feet over the edge of the bed, even when I'm jet lagged, and get up here and talk to you today. And I tell you, it's powerful medicine, and it is true every day that I say yes to this calling, okay? And that, yes, there are times when it's still very stressful, and yes, there are times when maybe I would rather not, but I do it. I do it because, in part, because I recognize that it's powerful medicine. Even on the days when things are really tough, I get up and I say yes to what it is that I do. This is my lovely daughter, Cheyenne. Now, way back in 1995, when I came here, I would say I would never be well enough or feel able to parent. My partner, Deborah, and I adopted Cheyenne when she was 3 years old, and today Cheyenne is 23 years old, and I did it. I was able to parent a lovely human being. I'm very proud of her. And being a good parent, yes, it has its stresses. It's definitely not boring, but it is a good, life-giving kind of stress, a stress that reminds me of what matters in this life. And being a good parent fills my days with joy, sometimes sadness, sometimes anger, but it definitely helps keep me focused on being my very best self for this young person. We cultivate raspberries. Cultivating raspberries is powerful personal medicine because it helps to get me grounded and helps me just focus and be here now. I work from my home. I run my own company now. And the days can get very busy, right? And I can be zooming along and doing too many emails and multitasking and all of that jazz. And then noontime comes, and I take a break, and I go out into the farm in the back of my home, and I get a bowl, and I pick raspberries. And I have to pick raspberries one at a time. And damn it, I try to multitask, right? I'm like, with the raspberries. But if you do that with raspberries, you get pricked by the stingers, right? Personal medicine, it slows me down. Be here now. I got to focus on that raspberry because there are 3 thorns around it and a bee right there. I'm going to take that one, right? And I'm going to leave a couple for the birds, right? Wow, powerful medicine. I'm not going over and grabbing diazepam. I'm going to go pick a raspberry, right? And I'll eat there. Powerful medicine. I do it. I really do. It helps to ground me, and it makes my day. Many other kinds of personal medicine in my life, and I'm so, so grateful for it. So I just want to offer you this reflection as I close out. And then my plan is, during my second lecture today, I want to share with you a time where we can have like questions and answers and be able to do some back and forth. But we'll do that during the second lecture, if that's okay with you. So I share with you this final poster. And that is that I think as people who are working in mental health services, whether we're peer supporters or we are professionals in clinical service or we are professionals working in rehabilitation services, I do believe that our challenge, our most fundamental challenge, is to be bold and brave and daring enough to remain human-hearted while we're working in these sometimes not so human services. That it can be a challenge to come to work every single day and to meet people who are hurting and to meet people who are facing complex, difficult challenges. It can be tempting when we're doing our work to show up and to go through the motions more like a bit of a robot more like an automaton. It can be difficult to show up and be fully human-hearted day in and day out when we're working with people who are facing sometimes very complex challenges. It can be difficult to show up every day with our hearts open, reaching across to the people that we're working with, searching for our recovery partner, looking past the diagnosis to the person. It can be easier, safer to say, here comes a schizophrenic, here comes a bipolar, here comes a borderline. I know what to do with borderlines. Okay, to have that disease focus, because it pushes us away. It gives us some distance, some breathing room. And it lets us feel in charge. I know what to do. I know what to do. I went to school. I know how to treat the disorder. That knowledge is important. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's not enough, right? That is toxic help focused on diseases. Help that's helpful, help that's recovery-oriented, is help that requires that I show up at work being bold and brave and daring enough to be human-hearted, first and foremost. That's why I call the collection of my work common ground. My most fundamental belief is that it is only in and through discovering the common ground of our shared humanity as human beings in all of our vulnerability, that's the place where we meet the people that we're working with. It's not that I am Dr. Digan coming down from on high to fix you because you're broken. I can't fix you. I can't fix you. What I can do is use my humanity to touch yours and discover my recovery partner, discover the person behind the diagnosis, the person who is resilient. I don't care how sick you look on the surface, how unwell. I keep remembering I was that person sitting in that chair. People would walk by me. There's a chronic schizophrenic. There's a person in there, right? And our job is to be bold and daring enough to bring our humanity to bear and find our recovery partner, that partner in the co-creation of wellness and of health. And if there's one thing I know, it's that each and every one of you in this audience today are here not because of the very high salaries and fabulous cars you get to drive when you work in clinical and rehabilitation services. It's not about the paycheck, right? So why do you come back to work every day? Why do you do it? Why? Why? Well, the answer I've come up with is you all look great on the surface, right? You all look really together on the surface. And that's good, and that's all right. You're showing up. But I know that the reason you come back to work tomorrow and the next day and the next day, okay, is because you personally have made some kind of journey. You personally know what it means to be knocked down by this life and for a moment, or perhaps for a prolonged period, wonder, will I ever get back on my feet again? Can I make this difficult passage? You're here because you made a passage. It might have not have been a passage through mental illness per se. You know, maybe it was alcoholism in the family. Maybe it was bullying as you were coming up, right? Maybe it was the loss of a loved one or even a child to cancer. I don't know what your passage was about, but I know that you made it. And that the reason we come back to work tomorrow is because we're carrying a gift. That we're carrying hope. That even when life deals us the most difficult of challenges, you're showing up at work because you know something about what it means to be resilient, to pass through what you thought might kill you and come out the other side a more compassionate person, less likely to judge others because you've been there in your own way. And I'm not suggesting that we show up to work and like spill all our story all over everybody. What I am suggesting is it's precisely our own gift that we're carrying, that gift of hope, that gift of, okay, life knocks you down, but you get back up. Okay, it's that gift. That's why we keep coming back, because we're charged with passing that on to people who are hurting, to people who are suffering. And it's precisely from that vulnerability an incredible strength arises within us. From the vulnerability, a strength arises within us to come back the next day and the next day. And that people who have not had that lived experience, they'll come, they'll last for 6 months and they'll leave. They don't stay. You guys stay. And I want to applaud you because you stay. I want to say good job. I want to say don't give up. That I'm back my last time here, 1995, and I see tremendous progress. You know, I'm seeing soteria here. I'm seeing peer specialist and peer support workforce emerging. I'm seeing psychiatric rehabilitation flourishing. And yes, they cut the budgets. And yes, they downsize. And yes, that can become discouraging. But we keep coming back. And it's about the people. It's about the people. And it's about this profound belief that in vulnerability, there is strength. There is beauty, right? And so I want to thank you for all it is that you do. Don't give up. We are making progress. People are recovering. Maybe not as quickly as we might hope and pray for, but recovery is real. Recovery is real. Thank you for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask about personal medicine after the age of 45, 55, 65, etc., and facing the double stigma of mental illness and ageism.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So I was telling Max, he was asking me a similar question, Max Lachman, and he said, and I was saying that I was in Switzerland last summer giving a talk on recovery and the aging process, right? And I do think that ageism, which would be a form of systemic discrimination against people who are older, is real, and that can be an additional and unnecessary burden in terms of recovery. I think the dynamics of recovery change just like we change as we're aging, as we're growing older. I think that for me, the process of aging and my recovery has been that of realizing that in the beginning, I used to think of schizophrenia, the disease, as something that was big and outside of me. And one way I represent that, I'm very visual, so I think symbolically. I saw it as this great big owl that grabbed me and took me away, psychosis. It took me off when I was young. And slowly, over time, I've been shrinking that dangerous owl of schizophrenia down. And then I began to realize, yeah, I'm 65. And over time, what's happened is this realization of, wait a minute, it's just me. You know, I still hear distressing voices. They've never gone away. You know, they don't rule me. They don't dominate me. I have to use personal medicine every single day in my life. What I know, because I'm wise, is that you are all using personal medicine too, right? We all do, right? So for me, aging and recovery process has meant accepting myself and accepting that all of us are living with some kind of vulnerability. We just are. That's what it means to be a human being. We live with vulnerabilities. Mine may be different than yours. I'm going to get on that flight back to Massachusetts, back to Boston, and it's guaranteed I'll hear voices. But I know what to do about it now. And maybe I have a little special voice hearing gift that maybe you don't hear. But I've learned to take that big scary owl and say, no, 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 that's me. It's just something I do. It's the way I am. So one of the questions I find myself asking is, at what point do we stop with all the treatment and just say, I call it embracing neurodiversity. There are different ways of being human. And just let somebody be, right? I remember doing a consultation for a mental health service provider that was working in a group home with a gentleman who was, I don't know, 58, and guy getting on in life. And he had been, he had symptoms, and I said, what does he like to do? Oh, he likes to cook, and he likes to make meals for people, and he likes to do the yard work at the group home. I said, why can't that be enough? He wants to live his life. Can we stop with so much treatment? You think this is all going to change in the next couple of years? I don't think so. Can we accept him for who he is, embrace him for who he is, and focus more on what he does well and less on what the problem areas are? So that's a little bit about how my sense of aging and recovery is a deeper and deeper level of self-acceptance, and that's really helped with the stigma. The stigma has not completely left for me. In fact, I was saying the other day that the thing that I found the most difficult part of stigma was when I became a mom. And I can speak to a big room like this and be okay, sharing. But letting my little daughter's parent know about what I do for a living and, and my company and the work I do, that was much harder. Because her friend's mom might say, well, she can't come to a play date at your house. You're a schizophrenic, right? Really? So I found that to be very challenging, and I was surprised at myself. But there it was as I was growing and changing. So I guess the shorter answer is, as we age, as we mature, just like every other phase of life, what matters to us, what has meaning to us, evolves, it changes. And that's good. So thanks for the question. Yeah.